Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today in War Thunder it's time to have a look at another proposed tech tree suggestion from Ck16. Now if you don't remember, a few months ago, before all of the crazy stuff about the updates started, we went through some of the really interesting tech trees that CK has made, and I thought why not get back to that and have a look at some of the other ones. Remember that CK is an individual who puts a lot of effort into these, and I just want to thank him for doing it. You know, one of the great things that we've seen through the past to developers stuff and also through videos like this is that there is a ton of members of the community who are heavily engaged in the game and really like creating really interesting stuff around it, which is just really fun to cover, if I'm honest. Like in a video like this, I can go through all of these new vehicles, it can give people ideas of what to look for in the future, and maybe give people ideas of what they personally want to see as well. So once again, thank you to CK for creating this, and also remember that the way that he likes to do his tech trees and believes how it should be in the game is that they're split into two halves. So you have the first half, which is like the World War II to Korean War area, and then you have the other one, which is like the 60s to the 90s. So this one, today, we're looking at is the 60s to 90s one. I will leave a link in the description so you can have a look at it for yourself and see any of the interesting vehicles. The ones which are highlighted with yellow borders are the ones which have not made it to the game yet, so we're going to be covering those ones instead of all of them, since, well, you can just have a look at the other ones in the game itself. So let's get started with the first one of the TD line, which to me should be probably better if it was just labeled like the ATGM line, but TD makes sense as well. So the 2P27. Now what is this machine? Well, it's pretty much a little truck which is based on the armored BRDM-1. It has 3 pop-up launch rails which are protected by an armored cover, and it entered service in 1964 using the 3M6 Schmel M-Close wire-guided anti-tank missile. So this would be very similar to the keyboard-controlled missiles that we have in the game. As you can see, it would be not very well armored at all, but it would have access to 3 of these wonderful missiles. It would fit well as a scout vehicle or just a general anti-tank vehicle with the missiles in tow. Another thing to also point out on this vehicle is it does have these little wheels here, and after talking to Tazzy and I came to the conclusion that one of the issues that a lot of these Soviet trucks have or had at the time was that their engines were not the best, and also their suspension, let's just say being either leaf spring or some alternative of that, wasn't exactly great at going over areas such as trenches. So the idea would be to put these little wheels in the center to be able to get over rough terrain or trenches instead of doing a fully tracked vehicle, because obviously that's a lot more expensive. This is another picture of a similar variant, or basically the same variant, just maybe a slightly older version, which has once again the 3 launchers in the back of all to see. So let's go on to the next vehicle, which is the BRDM-2 Malyutka. As we said, this is based on the BRDM-1. Well, let's have a look at the BRDM-2. You can see it's a lot more revolutionized. It still has the same idea of the 4-wheel base with the wheels in the center here, but you can now see the Malyutkas, which are present in the game. On the BMP-1 you can find them. They are the keyboard-guided missile that you get before you get the improved BMP-1P missile, so these would also be keyboard-guided. It's an amphibious armored patrol car, and it launches, as I said, the Malyutka Ms. It has they are M-Close wire-guided anti-tank guide missiles, and it also has a 140 horsepower engine. And so the problem once again is that there is quite a lot of weight on this vehicle, and the engine itself isn't good enough to get it over a lot of the rough terrain, so you have the extra wheels there to be able to do it. This, as you can see, shows the wheels at the bottom just to show what they look like when they're kind of extended. They're obviously not fully extended here, they're nearly there, but yeah, it's just something to look for. The next vehicle after this is obviously an evolution of the BRDM-2, which is of course the Conkers one. Now what is the difference between the Malyutka and the Conkers? Well, it's just different ATGMs. So as you can see, this is the version of the amphibious vehicle which has the ATGM launcher for the Conkers. It has a set of 5 of them which it can fire at the same time, the 9M113s, and the AT5 launcher can also fire another missile known as the Faggot or the AT4 Spigot. So it does have a multi-purpose role in that way that it can fire different weapons. And also this is basically an expansion of the next one, the Conkers M, because as you found with the Malyutka, you had the Malyutka, then you had the Malyutka M, the same as with the Conkers. So you had the Conkers, ATGM, and then the basically improved one, which is also the Conkers M. So that would be this vehicle here, which is exactly the same, apart from it has a slightly better ATGM on top. Then we go a little bit bonkers. So we have the chrysanthemum, or the chrysanthemum. I'm sure I'm saying that exactly wrong, but now we get in some really cool territory, and part of the territory that we haven't really got to, and I'll show you why. So after these machines, we now moved on to this. Now this is known as, well, the chrysanthemum, and what it is an A-close radar beam riding or SA-close laser beam riding missile. This is a wire-guided laser, which, well, the way it works, right, is you put a laser on a target, this thing flies upwards, and then it goes down onto a target. You know, it basically lasers in on it, and that's how it works. So you have a wire-guided laser, it's a continuous laser beam, which is generated towards the target, and a sensor in the rear section enables the missile to ride the laser beam to the target. And what is interesting, because of this way of that it works, you know, the fact that you have the continuous laser beam, but it's also wire guided, if you want to make adjustments in flight, you can. So this isn't just a fire or forget missile, this is one where you can actually adjust it as it goes, which sounds really cool. Now, the reason why this thing is cool is because it is an anti-tank missile. There's also an anti-air version. You have a thermobaric warhead version and also a heat warhead missile. Obviously the heat one designed for tanks, the thermobaric one designed for air. And when it comes to other stuff, it was actually designed in the 1980s and only entered service in 2005. And we're talking about the actual missile here. And what is interesting is obviously you have the platform here, which looks very similar to a BMP-2, may I just say, and it's called the 9P1572 Chrysanthemum S variant of the BMP-3. So you take a BMP-3 chassis, you add some radar to it, you add some laser range, so you add some laser, or lasers to it, or okay, you know what I mean, right? Some laser guidance systems, there we go. And Bob's your uncle. But the main thing with the chrysanthemum from this area is, first of all, it's auto-loaded, so once you fire these two off, it just goes vertical and then it loads automatically onto it, and you can actually fire both missiles at the same time at 2 different targets. So once you have one lined up, once it's going away to the target and it's, you know, lasered in and it's following it, you can then fire another one while the other one is still traveling and track 2 separate targets at once. Which is something which I don't think we have in game right now. All we have is the idea that once a missile is on a specific path, you can launch another one and the other one will stay on that specific path. That is not what the chrysanthemum can do. You can still technically control either missile after they have been fired, which is scary, but also cool if we think about it from a gameplay point of view. The next vehicle to have a look at is in the light tanks line, and it is the PT-76B Malyutka. Now, the PT-76B is, well, it's pretty simple. You take a PT-76 and you strap a Malyutka ATGM system on the back of it. As I said, the same missile that you see on the BMP-1, which is not upgraded. This also has a different name, though. The name of it is the PT-71. It only existed in, I believe, prototype form, so it's not, you know, a crazily mass-produced thing. But then again, all you pretty much much doing is mounting a missile system on the back of the turret. That's all you're doing. So if you wanted to add it to the game, I think it could easily be possible. The next one is, of course, the BMP-1P. We're not going to cover this because we technically do have it in game, but it is seen as an upgrade, you know, a modification for the BMP-1. It basically just gives you the better ATGM, which is mouse guided instead of keyboard guided, but CK wants them split up. I personally would like to see them split up too, because I do think it does change the vehicle on a fundamental level. The next vehicle to have a look at is the BMP-3, and the big difference between the BMP-1, the BMP-2, and the BMP-3 is, of course, the guns between them. So this is the BMP-3. What it has is a low velocity 100mm rifled gun. It can fire the Bastion ATGMs, and it can also fire, obviously, just standard 100mm rounds. It has a 30mm cannon, which has a dual feed of APT and HEI connected to the 100mm, and also it has a rate of fire of about 350 to 400 RPM. So the way I like to see it personally is, if you're looking at a BMP-1, it's got the 73 on it. If you're looking at a BMP-2, it's got the fast firing 30 on it, or I believe it's, yes, it is a 30. And then if you're looking at a BMP-3, you've got the 100 and you've got the 30. Like, that is at least the easiest way, you know, of working it out. So obviously there are machine guns and everything on top of this, and as you can see here, it also has the Ck16's system, which consists of an auto-loader for the 100mm of 22 rounds, and this thing has overall protection up to about 12.7mm machine gun rounds, and the 7.62 PKT machine gun with 2,000 rounds. So this thing is a lot more heavily armed than stuff like the BMP-1 and 2, and instead of having the extra external missile system, it just incorporates it in that 100mm gun, which makes everything just a little bit easier, I suppose, when it comes to, you know, the operation of the machine, especially with that autoloader. I believe it can hold 8 ATGMs in total, meaning that you are at least a little bit limited in that, but you should have plenty of rounds afterwards. The next vehicle to have a look at is the Ck16's. This is generally seen as one of the prototypes for the Terminator, and if you don't know what the Terminator is, that is the machine which is being used on the, I can't remember its name now. Goddamn. You know the tank which has the manless turret, right? The one which I always forget the name of. But anyway, it's using that chassis, and it's being used to be able to it's being used to as an infantry support vehicle, basically. Now, what they did before they created that machine was they tried different levels of prototype. One had two 30mm attached to it, the other had once again two 30mm attached to it, but it was a hell of a lot of armor on it and ERA, and the other one was this machine that you see here. And this is a T-72 chassis, which, you know, they up-armored, at least the front of it. You can see this little block here, which is normally what you would see on a T-72, and then also added a BMP-3 turret onto it, so had the 100mm and also the 30mm as well. Overall, it would be a beefy machine when it comes to a light tank, but I think it would fit really cool in that area. I think that would be absolutely awesome when it comes to it today. I think that it may not fit exactly in the light tank line though, just because of the fact that it is quite chunky. And the machine I was thinking about was the Armata, by the way, the T-14. I can't believe I forgot that. Anyway, moving on to the next line. What we have is a lot of vehicles we already have in the game, which is great, and then, of course, the T-72 Ural. Now, I didn't realize, but the Ural is actually named after, or sorry, the Ural part, I should say, is named after the company that built the specific machine, which is really, you know, interesting, at least in my books, because I thought personally that it would just be a random name, or maybe of a designer, or, you know, something like that, but to be actually named after the company itself is pretty cool. Like, I think that's pretty awesome when it comes down to it. And overall, if you want to know the full manufacturer's name, it is Ural Vagon Zavod in, well, whatever language it is, which I'm sure is Russian, and I apologize for butchering it. But the T-72 Ural is seen as the main production, or the original production, I should say, version of the T-72. It's the one which has the 125mm, and as I said, Ural Vagon Zavod produced the first prototype of the T-72. So this is before it really got any upgrades. This was just the base model, and as you'll find with a lot of Soviet vehicles at the time, their base models were okay, but they were built upon incredibly quickly when it came to it. And as you can see from this list, you can see it happening. We have the T-72A, the T-72B, the T-72B, 1989, and the T-72BU. So we actually have the A in game, which is wonderful. So let's move on to the B. The B is a straight upgrade from its predecessor. You've got a new main gun. It's still 125mm, but it is new. You've got a new stabilizer, new sights, new fire control. It's also capable of firing the Sphere, the SVIR guided missile. It has additional armor, 20mm of applique armor in the front of the hull, and an improved 840 horsepower engine. So this is just right, so we have a cool design here in the form of the T-72. Let's beef it up, let's make it absolutely ace and just chuck everything that we can on it, which is pretty much what we did. Hey Bernard, how you doing? So after that, when we look at the list, you have the T-72B, which we just looked at, and then the 1989 version of the T-72. What they did was they equipped it with Contact 5 explosive reactive armor and some composite armor in the sides of the turret as well. So made it a lot more similar to what we see from the T-80U's turret, at least in game. The Contact 5 was obviously a big step in ERA design for the Soviets, and therefore having a T-72 which replicates that idea, in my opinion, would be a great step forward. And then that is obviously the 1989 upgrade with the Contact 5. Moving on, you have the T-72BU or T-90. Now it's kind of interesting why it has two separate names. It's because it was originally the T-72BU and then was changed into the T-90. My guess is because they thought that either the name was getting too long or because it was a conglomeration of the T-72 and the best parts of the T-80U. Why not just put them together and create a new designation instead of, adding to the list of letters that we have? So pretty much they took a T-72 in the 1990s, looked at it and decided to take all the great elements of the T-80U, which was seen as the main battle tank for the Soviets at the time, and add them onto it, creating just a wonderful blend of two vehicles. Like, this is seen as obviously the vehicle to go forward in the 90s for the Soviets, and you can understand why. So this is, they also increased the protection of this machine. It includes a blend of steel and composite armor. They kept the 125mm 2A46 smoothbore gun, probably just to keep it standardized. It's obviously a lot easier to do in that way. And they kept the 840 horsepower engine, the V84MS 12-cylinder diesel engine, gave it a thermal sight and also the Contact 5 on top of it, and also the Shitora infrared 80GM jamming system. So this really was a step up for the Soviets, kind of like when they went from the T-64 to the T-80, now from the T-80 to the T-90, which is why people are very much afraid of it today. And then you have the T-90. Now the T-90 is the actual Russian army version, so this is one which is in service with the Russian military. It has a welded turret and also a different engine, the V92S2 engine, and an ESSA thermal viewer. So this will be the more common version that you're probably used to, with the ones which look like it has bug eyes. That this will be the one that you at least remember the most compared to this one here. So hopefully we get those in game game pretty soon. Looking at the rate that we're going in War Thunder, it would not surprise me. Now it's time to look at some SPAGs and some SAMs and get a little bit worried. So the first one is the Strela, or the BRDM-2 Strela. We've talked about the BRDM-2 already. It's just the amphibious armored carrier platform that you see here. What is interesting is the air-to-air missile system. It's obviously highly mobile since it is just an armored car. It's short-range, low-altitude, infrared guided surface-to-air missile system. So it's one of the earliest versions of what we see as a SAM sight in a way, which is on the move. Very, very destructive to whatever wants to be in the air. And then we, improve on it with the 9K35 Strela 10. The Strela 10 is just an upgrade of the existing Strela missile system. You can see that it's based on the MTLB chassis, which is based off the PT-76 chassis. So I'm sure that this is amphibious, or at least if it's not amphibious, it'll be close to it, and, very lightweight. But the main thing is, of course, the missile system on top, with access to 4 missiles, and then I'm sure some in the compartment as well. A crazy machine, which once added to the game, would definitely worry me. And then, of course, the Tunguska, which we have in game, so we don't have to worry about that. And then we go a little bit off the deep end, in my opinion, with the 9K330 Tor. Now, if you don't know what this machine is, it's this big hunk of junk. I shouldn't say hunk of junk, it's actually pretty good. But it does look absolutely ridiculous. This machine is designed to annihilate anything from low to medium altitude up to 6,000 meters, I believe. It's a short-range surface-to-air missile system with its operational range of 12 kilometers. Right? 12 kilometers this thing has a range of, so good luck getting anywhere near any battlefield while this works. It basically has 2 radar options. You have one which is mounted on the top, it's a target acquisition radar, and then you have a frontal tracking radar. So when those 2 meet up, bang, goes the missile. 8 are ready to fire, so if you screw up with one, guess what? You've still got 7 more options, and it's just an insane machine. If you've seen one of these in actions, or if you've looked at pictures of it, the first thing you realize is, my god, it's absolutely huge, and the second thing you'll think of is, how the hell does anything get near it? Well, nothing ever does. That's why I'm a little bit worried if we ever get to this level, because even with the Tunguska nowadays, nothing's getting close to the battlefield. If we add a machine like this in, I have no idea how anything's going to get close. But still, I like all of this tree, apart from maybe the Tor. I think the Tor goes a little bit too far. Moving on to the wheeled TDs and the light tanks, we have the Object 1200. Now, the Object 1200, before we go on, I was actually talking to Tazzy about this machine and how crazy it was, and the Americans also tried it, not around the same time, a little bit earlier, but this is kind of the same idea. You take an M113 chassis and set up 2 sets of radar on it with the missiles. I just thought that was kind of a cute picture. You can see the lad trying to get out or in right there. But anyway, the Object 12,000. What is this? Well, this is a Russian wheeled armored car of the 1960s. The idea of it was to fill a role as a personnel carrier or an AFV in the Russian army. This was before the BTR existed. I actually got kind of confused when looking it up, because it looks very similar to the BTR chassis, at least early versions of it, but no, this actually came before that chassis, and it showed that it had great speed on roads and great speed in general, but off-road it struggled with its 8-wheel system, and also there were just much better options out there at the time. It was also supposed to be fitted with the BMP-1 turrets, which you see here, so with the 73mm and also the Malyotka ATGM. So this, in its test trials, obviously it didn't have the full turret on it, but this is what it would have looked like if it had ever made it to full production, which unfortunately it didn't. But it was still a prototype, therefore it fits. The GAZ-50 is the next vehicle to have a look at, which is based on the BTR-60 Chassis, something that you're going to get used to over this video and many others, is, you know, the BTR chassis, the BMD chassis, the BMP chassis, all designed for different reasons and all with their interesting quirks. But pretty much what you do is you take a BTR-60 chassis, add a 73mm gun turret and an ATGM launcher, which is once again found on the BMP-1. This machine is amphibious as well. It fills the same role as any AFV. I'd just like to thank B. Young, Blackie, Daniel Stanton, Dyslexic Child, Martinez, Matati, Moxie, Nito, Nick Graham, Alobralo, and Super Cacti for supporting me on Patreon.